Originally, this video was going to be about why I thought D&D and really all tabletop role-playing games were at their best when they were human-centric.
Now who you supposed to be?
Oh, that's Black Dynamite.
I ain't asked you, nigga. Shut up.
But then I realized I don't actually give a fuck about that. And what I really wanted to say was that fantasy races just suck for immersive role-playing campaigns.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Let me explain. First, if you're playing casually or, very beer and pretzels, that's fine. This video is not for you. There's a ton of fun to be had playing the game as a game and not taking it too seriously. But if you're genuinely serious about immersion, realism, and meaningful roleplay, then fantasy races just do not do well in my experience, even at tables that claim to be serious. There's always been two things about fantasy races that have bothered me from the time I started playing. For one, they're largely not treated with any sense of seriousness. The vast majority of the time, people basically just take some sort of human culture or element and then apply pointy ears and a long life sticker over the top. There's rarely a genuine effort to distinguish them as anything but humans with, just a few unique traits about them. If the writer is, really creative, then maybe they make their culture a blend of, two human cultures instead of just the one. The other issue I have actually kind of goes hand in hand with the first. When they are taken seriously and truly distinguished as something other than human, then they are basically too alien to authentically portray. Perfect to be written about, not to be played. This limitation is also not merely a matter of imagination, but it is deeply rooted in our human experience. These fantastical beings with their alien physiologies, psychologies, and cultures exist outside the realm of our lived experience. When we attempt to portray beings like elves especially, I find that the result often just veers towards caricature and stereotype rather than a genuine nuanced depiction of truly alien entities. Again, I want to reiterate, this is only in the context of a really serious, immersive role-playing game. There's no problem with caricature or stereotype when the game is about just having fun, rolling some dice, and fucking around with your friends. But there is a huge difference between these two types of games and the approaches that people have. I'm sure I'll get a lot of, but we do take it seriously. I genuinely care about what happens in my game, and all my players do too. We roleplay everything. And I'm sure you do. I'm not denying that good roleplay doesn't exist just because fantasy races are included, but you're likely doing it all from a fully human experience. Let's look at elves, for example, right? Oftentimes, they are depicted as ageless and immensely wise beings. They are supposed to embody an almost sacred and divine connection to nature, with a deep well of ancient knowledge and a grace that is far beyond any human capabilities. However, when people attempt to portray elves, even in serious role-playing games, they are often just distilled down into a narrow set of behaviors, aloofness, condescension, and a detachment to the world around them to an insane degree. What should exist and be the defining details of a species that is as intricate or complex as our own, maybe even more so if you consider the traits that they have, is boiled down to a shallow, predictable caricature. This tendency to reduce non-human races to caricatures comes from our own need to categorize and simplify the unfamiliar. It's an immense challenge to even write and portray these beings whose experiences and mindsets are fundamentally different from our own in fiction, where you have all the time in the world to kind of think about it, let alone to try and do that on the fly while improvising in a tabletop game. We often rely on these exaggerated traits that are easy to grasp and convey. Think of them as shortcuts, right? Now, when you think of a dwarf, what do you tend to imagine? Beard, axe, stone, and ale. This stuff is great for quick characterization, and it works perfectly for tabletop games, but it's just surface level, and in a serious role-playing game, if surface level traits are your defining characteristics, then what does the species or race matter at all? When it's all boiled down to a handful of superficial qualities, then you lose the uniqueness of the race altogether. An elf becomes nothing more than a human with an affinity for archery and a longer lifespan. At this point, the race is essentially just a set of stats or aesthetic choices with no real impact on how the character interacts with the world, or how the player engages with the role-playing experience. Why complicate it with fantasy races at all, right? When every character is fundamentally human, the game becomes about the diversity of the human experience, the way we act, the way we think and live, rather than trying to force differences through superficial racial traits. Portraying non-humans is a challenge precisely because it requires us to step outside our human frame of reference. A task that, even given all the time in the world, a lot of people just cannot do, and it's argued that it's actually impossible if you want to get real technical. Either way, it's incredibly difficult. Look at the number of fantasy authors that can barely do it, let alone to try and do so in an improvisational setting. I don't know about you all, but my main goal when building a world or fantasy setting to run my games in is to create something that is rich and believable. I strive for an immersive game. To me, that is the whole point of tabletop role-playing games, and something that no other medium so far has been able to provide for me. So the idea of reducing what could be a vibrant and diverse fantasy setting down to a collection of predictable and shallow archetypes runs completely in opposition to that goal. Another thing is that, despite their similarities, I actually don't think what I said applies to stuff like, vampires or werewolves.
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
This is a shout out to a buddy of mine who tried to argue the opposite. Take games like Vampire the Masquerade or Vampire the Requiem. These are games that use the condition of vampirism as an opportunity to explore the human condition through the lens of monstrous transformation. Playing a vampire in these games isn't like playing an elf, despite the trope similarities of longer life, unnatural grace, and aloofness to the world. Playing a vampire is not about embodying an alien being with different traits or abilities. It's about delving into the psychological and existential consequences of being something that was once human and yet is now irrevocably other. The focus of these games is on the tension between the remnants of human identity left behind and the monstrous nature that now defines the character. They're about the struggle of losing your identity, grappling with the reality of a newfound immortality and the darkness inside them that is increasingly pulling them away from the person that they once were. Another thing is that most vampire games are also set in a modern urban setting, where the characters have to navigate a world that is still fundamentally human while hiding their true monstrous nature. This adds a lot of depth to the role-playing experience because the players have to consider how they fit into or manipulate the human society that they were once a part of. To me, these are a lot simpler to immerse yourself in and roleplay because the themes are so connected to the idea of being human rather than a completely removed and alien-like experience. We can more easily connect to these premises than anything a fantasy race could offer. I mean, what it really comes down to with me is that so long as the intent is to treat fantasy races as imaginative variations on the human theme, then they serve their purpose well for casual games. When you get more into the serious role-playing groups, though, I find it very difficult to stay immersed when the other players are basically playing a horned demon, a bird person, or, like a fucking turtle man, but they're all just acting like humans anyways. I don't know, maybe this is my own limitation or weird focus. I just want all fantasy races to feel like they genuinely matter and aren't just a sticker laid over the top of a human character. I can understand the stat variation and the connection to the actual, game experience, but at what point isn't it just more immersive to make everybody human with these unique traits as some sort of, evolution on mankind, rather than trying to portray them all as unique and distinct races? So yeah, I don't know. Not much more to say really. Fantasy races are fun, so long as the goal is just a fun game to play with your friends. They suck in immersive role-playing games, and nobody's going to change my mind. Either way, please feel free to try in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching. I'm Trill, and I hope you enjoyed.